Good morning or good afternoon, it's Miss Bauer again, and today we're going to talk about trigonometry, or what most people call it is just trig for short. Now, I can assure you that the name trigonometry sounds a lot scarier than what trig actually is. So if you think back, we've talked about what some of these little symbols mean or what some of these abbreviations are. So SOH is just a short way of remembering sine. So sine abbreviates to SIN, still called sine, and our formula for sine is that sine of theta. So this symbol right here means theta. Theta is basically just an angle. So whenever it talks about theta, we're just talking about an angle, specifically one of our acute angles. So our formula for sine, so sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse. And you don't have to memorize these trig formulas. These will be provided to you. You just need to know how to find each part. So our first trig formula is sine, and we abbreviate that to say sine of theta, or sine of our angle, is opposite over hypotenuse. Our next trig formula is if you have cosine. Cosine we abbreviate to COS. So cosine of theta is adjacent over the hypotenuse. And if you're starting to notice here, like SOH, like SOH, CAH, like CAH. And then TOA, our last trig formula is tangent. And tangent, we abbreviate to TAN. So tangent of theta, tangent of our angle OA would be opposite over adjacent. And the common phrase that helps people remember these is Sohcahtoa. So there's all these little silly stories with how to remember it, but it's just Sohcahtoa. So Sohcahtoa, people will say like soak your toe. Anyways, Sohcahtoa. And remember, you don't even have to memorize these formulas. So if you can't remember Sohcahtoa, you'll be okay because you'll be provided these formulas. So the way that it works is that theta is your angle, and then we're going to label our sides and go from there. So this problem says find sine of u. It's not sin of u, but it says find sine of u, find cosine of u, and tangent of u. So if we notice, we're using the same angle, and that's angle u. So for this particular problem, theta, or my acute angle, is angle u. That's the angle I'm going to revolve around. Now it says write each answer as a fraction and as a decimal. We're going to take out that decimal part, and we're just going to leave our answers as fractions. If you can find the fraction answer, then you can easily go to the calculator and just divide, and that's how we would get the decimal. So if I'm using angle u, I need to first figure out which side is which. Like which side is the opposite, which side is the hypotenuse, and which side is the adjacent. So opposite is always opposite my marked angle. If I'm talking about angle u when I go across, then 16 would be my opposite side. So I'm going to label WV 16 as the opposite side. Now I have two other sides to label, and that's adjacent and that's the hypotenuse. Well, we know which one is the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always across from your box. So that would be 34, your longest side. That's your hypotenuse, which means that our last side has to be adjacent. And it really helps to go in that order of OHA. Find your opposite side, then your hypotenuse, and adjacent will be the last one. So now I'm going to go ahead and I have these trig formulas. So my first trig formula was sine of theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. Well, I'm using angle u, so I'm going to say sine of u equals, and now I just fill in the numbers. So the opposite side was 16 over the hypotenuse is 34. And I just need to be careful to ask myself, does that reduce? Does 16 over 34 simplify? Is there a number that goes into 16 and 34? Well, they're both even, which means if I divide each one by 2, that would reduce down. So my final answer, I'm going to say that sine of u equals 8 over 17. Now, if you have trouble reducing your fractions, the calculator will actually help you out. And that's if you go and you type in. So if you do like 16 divided by 34 in the calculator, it gives you a decimal, and then you press the math key and then do enter, enter. it will go ahead and convert that fraction to a simplified fraction for you. So it will go from a fraction to a decimal to simplified. And that's simply type it in and then press math, enter, enter, and it's going to reduce it for you. Now, moving on, we found sine of u. So taking a look at cosine. So our cosine formula is cosine of theta equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So cosine of u equals, well, the adjacent side is 30. And the hypotenuse is 34. And those are both even as well, which means that I can go ahead and reduce this one and simplify it by taking the 2 out. So cosine of u would equal 30 divided by 2 is 15 over 34 divided by 2 is 17. And that's it. And then for our last one, so our last formula is tangent. So tangent of theta equals opposite over adjacent. And then just go look at your picture. So tangent of u, so I was revolving around angle u, so tangent of u is opposite 16 over adjacent 30. And if everything's been divisible by 2, these are also divisible by 2, so I'm going to divide each part by 2 and reduce that fraction down or simplify it. So tangent of u would be 8 over 15. And those are your trig ratios. Remember that a ratio is just a fraction. So like our trig ratios, we literally just labeled and then we found all of our fractions. That was it. So let's do another one. This one now says find sine of w, cosine of w, and tangent of w. So what angle are we revolving around now? And now we're revolving around angle w. So I like to circle it or highlight it or make some note of which angle are you revolving around. Okay, and then write each answer as we're going to cross that part out again, and we're just going to do as a simplified fraction. So just like what we did above. Okay, so now I'm using angle W. So now I'm going to label everything. So I'm going to start with opposite, and if we ask ourselves what's opposite, what's across from angle W, that would be 30. So that's my opposite now. 34 is still the hypotenuse across from the box, and then 16 would be adjacent. So if I'm using that Sohcahtoa and filling in those formulas again, so sine of W, and then so is O over H. So sine of W would now be 30 over 34. And 30 over 34 is going to reduce or simplify down. If I divide each piece by 2, that would be 15 over 17. Remember, you can go to the calculator, type it in, and then press math, enter, enter. It's just a little trick. Okay, ca would be cosine. So cosine of W equals, and it's AH. So that would be A adjacent 16 over the hypotenuse, which is 34. And then that's also going to reduce down. Those are also divisible by 2. So cosine of W equals 8 over 17. And then our last one, TOA, which is tangent. So tangent of W equals opposite over adjacent. And our opposite is 30. If I go back and look, then the adjacent was 16. So 30 over 16. So when that reduces, tangent of W equals 15 over 8. And these are our trig ratios. So now it says find tangent of R and then find tangent of S. How are they related? So I'm going to start first with tangent of R. So remember, if I'm talking about tangent of R, I'm going to use angle R. And now I need to label my sides. So across from R, opposite from R is 45. That would be opposite, across, opposite. The hypotenuse is always across from the box, so that would be 53. There's your hypotenuse, which makes your last side adjacent. And if you remember that our tangent formula, and you can remember, you'll have it, you can reference it, go back up to the top, or just remember tangent was TOA. So tangent, TOA, is opposite over adjacent. So the tangent of R is opposite, which is 45 over 28. And if you go to your calculator, let's just say you're not sure if it reduces. So if you go to your calculator and you type in 45 divided by 28, it's going to give you a decimal. It's going to give you 1.607. It keeps going. And then press math, enter, enter. And it stays 45 over 28. So this is one that does not reduce. That's okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find tangent of S, which means that I'm not using angle R anymore. Now I'm using angle S, which means that I need to relabel my sides. Well, the hypotenuse isn't going to change. It's still going to be the biggest one. But now, what's my opposite side? It's the one that's across from S. So now 28 is the opposite, which would make 45 adjacent. So when I go to find tangent of S, and I'm doing opposite over adjacent, opposite would be 28 over 45. And that's my trig ratio for tangent of S. Now, the question is, how are they related? What happens from here to here? So I have 45 over 28, and then I have 28 over 45. Well, if you notice it, they flip. It's flipped. Those numbers change. One's 45 over 28, and then the other one is 28 over 45. And that's because we swapped out our angles. We'll always use the acute angles in trig, and if you change from angle R to angle S, or look back, when we changed from angle W to angle U, notice that my numbers kind of flip-flopped. So it really, really matters which angle you're talking about because it all revolves around that angle and how you label. So something to think about, something to be very, very careful with. Now, we're going to get into solving. So we're going to still use our trig ratios, but we're going to get into solving. And it says use the calculator. Now, the calculator will help you out here, but the calculator has to be put in a specific mode. There's some things you got to be really careful with. There's like some technicalities. So I'm going to cross out this use the calculator. I'm going to say use the trig chart. This is the trig chart right here. So this is your trig chart. This is going to save your life. Instead of having to deal with the calculator and the settings, you're going to use this trig chart, and it makes it so much easier. You don't have to deal with the hassle of the calculator. It's going to take away some stress as we begin solving problems here.